Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. I'm Brennan Decora, and on this show, we focus on techniques for inspired studio performances. Each week, I host experts from across the industry. Let's get started. On today's show, we have Brendan Lyons. He's a session drummer and part of the team at Sessionwire. He has credits with Dallas Alexander, toured with Gord Bamford, and is a two-time Canadian Country Music Association Drummer of the Year nominee. Enjoy. So first and foremost, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, thank you. It's always a pleasure to connect with another Brendan.
Yes, exactly.
I feel like there's so few of us.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, in this part of the world, there are.
True.
I feel like it's more common, elsewhere. But anyway, I'd like to start by, if you could kind of go over your backstory, kind of how you got to where you are, what led you to music, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's all that dissimilar to a lot of people in the beginning. My parents aren't necessarily very musical, though, my dad listened to some really cool music like Pink Floyd and the Tragically Hip Canadian band for all the Canadians watching. Okay. But when I was about 7 years old, my mom brought this little toy keyboard downstairs and said, "Hey, do you want to take organ lessons?" And as a kid, typically it's piano or something like that. But this was organ lessons. It was like, okay, organ lessons. So we took organ lessons, my brother and I, for about 7 years each. And, it wasn't like the hip B3, organ. It was like church organ. It was like,
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So we're playing all these like kind of classical tunes and stuff. Right. So, we took organ lessons for a few years there, and then kind of left that when I got into sports. I ended up playing volleyball up to my fourth year of university. So through high school and then in university, I played volleyball. But in high school, was in jazz band and concert band and drumline, and we had a rock band course in my high school. So it was still still heavily involved in music. And then in university, I kind of left it altogether because I was playing volleyball and doing a science degree, and just kind of for fun had a cover band or two going. And then at the end of my science degree, in my fifth year, two friends and I just decided, hey, we should go to music school after this. So we finished our degrees and we moved across the country to go to music school at MacEwan University here in Edmonton. And, I studied for what would they call it now? It's a Bachelor of Music in Drum Set Performance, I think is the title.
Nice.
Yeah. So, studied that and took a couple of recording courses while I was there. But in about my second year, I started touring with a kind of established country band based out of Edmonton here, and started kind of traveling around Western Canada, and slowly started getting into the freelance thing, started playing some blues gigs, some pop gigs, started experimenting with electronic triggering of things and working in Ableton, and it just snowballed from there, really. So,
nice.
I was about 23 years old when I started my music career, the beginning of my music degree.
Right.
And here we are.
Awesome. Nice. Now, you do remote recording sessions from your place there. And, a lot of what I like to talk about on the podcast is kind of how to inspire the artists with the, in the studio. And obviously being not only a session player, but remotely, how do you kind of optimize that to make sure that you align with the artist's vision?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, there's a lot of people that do their sessions, like they'll have the artist send them the whole thing, and the artist kind of says, "Here, just do your thing on the track." That's not really. I don't really resonate too well with that. I mean, I can do it.
Yeah.
I love sitting down and messing around with sounds and moving mics around and trying different parts. But at the end of the day, it's not my music. It's not my art. So I want the artist to be in the room with me as often as possible. So, when they contact me and they say, hey, can you play on this song? I say, great. Yes, I can. Would you like to be a part of it? And I just so happen to work for a company that developed a platform that allows that. So I will, invite them into my virtual studio and they can watch me perform and record the parts in real time and give me feedback as I'm doing it. So there's no kind of like disappointment when I send them the tracks after doing it all by myself. They know exactly what they're getting. They can have input on it from the get-go.
Right. Absolutely. No, I know, full disclosure, like it's all about Sessionwire. You work for Sessionwire and I use it a lot for my own mixing purposes. And it really has been great to connect with artists and work with them in real time, because there's definitely a disconnect of just sending files back and forth, especially like this is clearly a creative industry. So to kind of, even with my process, like I have, a questionnaire and I really kind of figure out what the clients want before I even start, but it's still without actually, not really being there, but having the client present to talk through things and work through ideas. It's really a game changer for sure. For sure.
Definitely.
And what challenges have you faced in remote session work?
I don't know if there are any challenges with the remote side of things. I mean, with a platform like Sessionwire, I think that kind of solves all of the remote challenges that there were, which again is like, it's the feedback from the client, the artist, the producer. The challenges prior to were, you'd track a song and send them what you've done, and then they wouldn't get back to you for 3 days. And in that 3 days, everything back here behind me, all the drums, all the mics, they'd be all changed. So if there were if there were any like revisions to be done, you have to start from scratch again,
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, that's the way that it is. And, it's interesting. I don't know if I can name drop him on this. I'll do it anyways.
Sure.
I had a brief conversation with Aaron Sterling the other day.
Okay.
And if
I know Aaron.
Yeah. Do you know him personally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we've worked on sessions before. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like he's for like remote drumming, I think he's the GOAT, whatever the kids are saying these days.
Yeah.
But if you go on his Instagram, which is @Sterloyd, and watch what he does, he's very vocal about his process being the opposite of what we're talking about right now. He's still having clients send him songs and he works on them on his own and sends them back. And I think that, if that works for him, clearly, like he says 20 songs a week. The producers and artists that he works with, they trust him that deeply. I think that's great. But I think that the world is kind of shifting and catching up with this idea that it can all be done right there in the moment. And I guess, does that I kind of wandered away from the...
No, that's totally fine. I mean, I feel like even my setup is kind of a hybrid where I do want to do the initial mix myself, especially because with mixing, like, probably 90%, if not more of the time, I don't need input. I'm doing technical things. I'm getting balances. I'm doing things that I don't want input, And then once I get to the point where I'm ready to share it, then it's like, okay, let's sit down and have a conversation. So it's kind of both, both avenues for sure.
Definitely.
And, I feel like part of it is with Aaron, like, I knew him when he lived in LA, he lives in Nashville now. And he was, one of the first call session guys where he would be there to record in the studio all the time. And so building up that relationship and that, that, that situation where people trust you, it's like you kind of have that where, yeah, just send me the files and I'll do my thing because we've worked together 20 times already and you know what I do. And so, to
Yeah.
expect, you know, but yeah, it's interesting how the world has changed, especially since COVID and, Zoom and everything else. It's like, everyone's a lot more open to online collaborating now for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it's even taken a year or two after the pandemic, the tail end of it
Mm-hmm.
for people to kind of come around and say, well, a parallel would be like the remote work for businesses that have like office buildings.
Right.
People are now just like there's still kind of beginning to realize, oh, hey, I really don't need to be,
Right.
and in the office to do this kind of work. Oh, hey, I don't
Yeah.
actually need to continue working, on my own in this isolated box if I can easily bring the
Right.
artist in here into my studio
Exactly.
and have their input.
Even in an extreme example, like there was a restaurant that I used to love that was nearby, and during the pandemic, they moved and they went to a full blown like sit down restaurant with a whole dining room, and they moved to just like a little takeout only spot where you just walk in and get takeout, and that's it. Like they realize they make tons of money just with takeout, that they don't even need that personal experience anymore. So it's like, okay, whatever works, and
Oh,
they're still doing great. So
that's great. Yeah. And their overhead is like
yeah,
nothing.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
So it kind of ties into my next question. We've already talked about it a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
in what ways do you think remote recording has changed the dynamics of music production, especially in terms of artist collaboration?
Oh, man. I think that there are certain pockets of the music community that have always been big on collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And, like the hip hop and rap community,
Right.
they're always wanting to work with each other. Get on my track and sing on my track, rap on my track,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
make a beat for me, that kind of thing. So
Right.
I think that they're the ones that are shifting the fastest into using a tool like Sessionwire to collaborate.
Right. Okay.
I mean, it feels to me that they tend to be the ones that are always forward thinking in terms of technology.
Mm-hmm.
They're always checking out the new gadgets, the new
Yeah.
mics. They're using Ableton or FL Studio, the kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
as much as I don't like FL Studio, it's just a little, it's a little,
Yeah.
technically
Not everyone
strange.
uses it, but
Yeah, it's a little technically strange. I mean, the fact that you can use a buffer size that's like 777 samples.
What?
Yeah, you can drag a slider and pick any sample
Wow.
size or any buffer size you want,
That's
and
crazy.
that just it wreaks havoc on machines. Anyways, I think that the remote collaboration, particularly again, not to talk about Sessionwire a lot, but with a tool like Sessionwire, these
Mm-hmm.
communities are fast moving towards building out their communities even further and deeper, because they're the ones
Right.
adopting this technology so quickly.
Right.
We're working on a
That's
partnership.
actually
Yeah.
that's actually interesting to hear because, typically half the scene of that world is the party vibe of
Mm-hmm.
everyone, 20 people in the control room all working all night long and partying. So it's interesting to hear that they're adopting this remote thing. It's like, well, then everyone's in their room by themselves. So how do you party like that?
Well, totally. But I mean, what happens when they're not in the same city together?
Right.
You
Yeah.
can't
It
be in
opens the doors.
Oh yeah. They just get in their virtual studio and they party,
Mm-hmm.
wherever they
Right.
are.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's
Nice.
really neat to watch. I mean, and I think the rock musicians are also kind of getting into it a lot quicker. Like they're
Right.
the band vibe. Like play on my track, I'll play on yours, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
I don't know if the pop, like the straight up pop artists, are quite there. They seem to be kind of insular in that they're very guarded in like their creative process, and
Yeah.
they have their tricks
Well,
in there.
yeah. It almost seems like in that world, the songwriters make the music with the singer present. And the singer will come up with an idea and lay down a few lines, then they'll work on the track some more and like build everything all in one thing. So, it's interesting that, they're not adopting that as much, but,
Yeah.
so how do you, you still do in studio sessions, occasionally for sure. How do you prepare for a recording session like that?
In person or remote?
I guess either one,
Yeah. Well, in terms of remote, I think it's similar to yourself. Before remote, kind of before you bring people into your mix, you do a bunch of prep. You do a first pass of the mix. If I'm doing a remote session, I'll spend an hour or two by myself, grabbing different drums, different cymbals, trying different tunings. No artist or producer wants to hear me hit a snare drum
right
1,000 times, adjusting things. So I do a lot of that prep. And then, at the time that the session is supposed to start, that's when I think that I've got everything pretty much set for what I hear in my head. And,
just ready to go.
Yeah. And usually, I'm sure most session musicians do this remotely too. You ask for like the 2 mix, you ask them for a 2 mix with drums if they've already programmed something, so you get an idea.
Right.
I ask them for like a title playlist of tracks that they like with the drum production and the sounds, and so that gives me a kind of a target to shoot for. If there's programming or percussion, I'll ask about that. Tracking in person, at a different studio, same kind of process. I'll ask for reference drums if there's any. I'll ask for the reference playlist, the same kind of thing. But then the studios that I do go to, there's a couple in town here. I've got a really good friend that owns a studio I work for quite often.
Okay.
I'll talk to him, what's the vibe? What do you want? He knows the drum kits that I have and stuff. And we'll decide on the drum kit that I should bring, or kits and snare drums and that kind of thing. Right. Another studio in another city a few hours away, they usually have a drum kit set up. And those sessions are a little bit different in that we go down and track 3 or 4 songs in a couple of hours. And it's very like country, almost Nashville style, like bang out the rhythm section live on the floor and get the fuck out, so they can do all the overdubs and the vocals. And so that's a little bit different. I don't have to take a kit down there, but I'll take 5 or 6 snare drums and all of my cymbals and that kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's almost like it seems like when you're doing remote work, it's almost like you're, half playing the producer role in a sense, trying to figure out the vibes of everything, Is there ever times when there's producers present as well, or you just work directly with artists most of the time? Yeah,
there's producers present. Yeah, sometimes the artists. It's a kind of something I was just thinking about before we connected. Is the kind of like imposter syndrome thing when you're self-producing a drum part for somebody. Right. And even just imposter syndrome in general, like being on this podcast, in my head, it's like, what am I doing here?
Oh, good.
Yeah. And so, it's strange. Producing myself, I question things a lot. And I think it's often because I've been very critical of myself my whole life, and I think the athletics thing kind of plays into that.
I see
quite a bit. I've been very critical of other people's work quite often as well, which is not really a good character trait, and I'm thankfully over that for the most part.
Yeah, all good. Well, you can't really win or lose at music necessarily. It's like there's no wrong answers,
Yeah.
So it's crazy.
And that's the tough part when you're working by yourself, is like, is this right or is this wrong? It's not It's not a black and white thing. It's a scale. It's a
exactly.
But having a producer on the call helps that immensely for me, because it's not up to me.
Of course.
I'm having that third party objective view of everything.
Right. For sure.
That, oh my God, that helps my anxiety so much.
Awesome. Of course. Awesome. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide, The Art Method, the Advanced Recording Toolkit. In it, I share the details of how you can get pro studio results from your home studio. I've believed for a long time that it's the cooking, not the kitchen. If you can learn some of the advanced methods for getting great results in the studio, you can do it in any studio. I skip the basics and dive into the more nuanced info you need to level up the quality of your home studio recordings. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/art. And now, back to the show. Could you share a memorable experience where you felt particularly connected to a project?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, I think, and all for different reasons. I think. I mean, yeah, and make no mistake, I'm not like a huge session player playing for like huge artists and stuff like that. I mean, the artists that I do play for, I love, and they're like they're local artists. I mean, I play for a tour internationally touring country artists, and I've done sessions for bigger kind of country things as well. But a lot of the sessions that I like the most are the local ones. And there's a couple of albums that I've done with my friend Harry at his studio, Riverdale Recorders here in Edmonton. And they're very much like art projects, art albums. There's a couple of artists, Emmett Michael. Is it Michaels or Michael? I feel like a terrible friend now. I have to look this up. Good. I haven't seen him in a long time. Emmett Michael. Yeah, that's what I thought. So, we did an album for Emmett a long time ago. And, given Emmett's history, you can go look up Emmett sometime if you want. And, very much like trans activist, LGBTQ activist, like really forward thinking, really deep story, like personal story. And, playing on that record was amazing. Just given the musicians that were involved, we're all really good friends, and get to spend a Friday, Saturday, Sunday just tracking a record together, and eating Vietnamese food in between tunes, and
definitely.
Yeah, so that was quite fun. And then on the more commercial side of things, there's studio just south of here, a few hours. We just did 2 or 3 years ago, did a record for this guy Sterling John, and it's nominated for a Juno Award, which is nice. The Canadian Grammys, I suppose.
Yeah.
And
nice.
It's up for Christian Album of the Year, which is cool. And the musicians that were on that was the first time I played with a bunch of the musicians that are like the musicians in Canada.
Nice.
Which was an absolute pleasure. And that one stands out as like a moment. It was like, this is really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. So how do you, and I know I'm kind of asking a lot of questions about remote recording, and it's not really on purpose, even though you work for Sessionwire, but it just kind of ended up this way.
It's good.
But how do you stay inspired and keep your performances fresh when you might not have the immediate energy of a live studio environment?
I mean, even in a live studio environment, some days you go in and maybe you're having an off day,
Yeah, that's true.
True. And I'm not sure how you obviously you sympathize, and you probably had those days where you go in to engineer a record and you're just like, I just don't want to be here right now,
Right.
But there's something about maybe the music that you're recording, or for me, it's like geeking out on mic placement, like mic placement. It's
Right.
not all that inspiring to many people, but but you spend like an hour tinkering with things, and before you know it, you're just immersed in what you're working on, and everything else just kind of goes away, and then it's just like, this is great. I'm playing drums for a living, like.
Right.
Awesome.
I don't know.
Yeah.
No, totally. That actually kind of ties into one of my other questions is, you obviously play drums, but you kind of engineer yourself as well. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of walk the line between the creative and the technical and keep that, separated in a sense?
And I don't know if I do that well, I remember distinctly this conversation I had with a friend that was playing. I was playing drums on a record for him. He was producing, and he's also like a wicked bass player. I think he's one of the most underrated bass players in Canada. And then he had an engineering for him, and we had this conversation about the engineering versus producing side of things and how you can keep them separate. And for the longest time, I considered myself more technical than creative, and I'm still mostly that way. Even with my playing, when I watch myself play, it's like, wow, it looks so technical and stiff. And I've had people come up after a show and they're like, "Did you go to school for drums?" And I'm just like, how could you tell? Because
jeez,
and I don't know. Up until, super recently, I haven't really allowed myself to be a creative. Again, due to the imposter syndrome thing, I see all my friends releasing albums. Everybody plays all kinds of instruments.
Right.
I've never felt that I could live up to that, so I just kind of stayed in my little area. But it is difficult, and I think with a remote session, the first couple hours of like tinkering with stuff is like the technical thing. Get that out of the way, fair. Right?
Yeah.
And then when the client's on, or when I go to do stuff on my own, that's the creative time, other than hitting spacebar and new playlist and stuff like that.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a question here, but I almost want to answer it myself because
do it.
I feel like in doing so, you're going to, it'll be awkward because it's kind of pushing Sessionwire in a sense.
Okay. Yeah.
So the question is, what advice would you give to artists and producers to help them get the best performance out of remote session musicians? And to answer it myself, I feel like Sessionwire is gold because I've used other platforms. Everyone's used platforms, and it's the first platform that integrates video and high-res audio and a separate talkback functionality that has auto mute. So essentially, it becomes transparent. That's the biggest thing is, I've done remote sessions in the past where I've literally had the client on a phone call on an earbud with my headphones over the earbud so I can hear both of them. And it's certainly hearing echo and it's just so clunky. It's the most uncomfortable thing where, having the correct, remote software like Sessionwire makes it as if they're in the room with you. And it just eliminates the technical side, and it's awesome. And I hate to, be a spokesperson, but I figure that'd be easier than you being the spokesperson since you work for them. But
yeah, no, you're doing great. You're doing great.
Okay.
It's exactly like you said. I mean, I think people have been searching for a way to have that immediacy for a long time, and there have been solutions. But the whole idea behind Sessionwire is to make it feel, not dissimilar from just having your artist in the live room and there's a piece of glass between you, which is
exactly
with Sessionwire's #Sessionwire's auto mute, shameless plug. The auto mute thing, the talkback stream, and then the dedicated HQ stream, it's almost identical to that feeling. For those of you that know what an analog console is, if you're under 18, you'll want to hit Wikipedia. But when you hit the talkback button and you're speaking to the artist through the glass,
right?
and you let it go, and then all you're hearing is the performance. It's nearly identical to that. And
exactly.
That
exactly.
Yeah, that in the moment feedback, both, you know, orally, as in like ears, and and visually, you know, the body language of your producer and your artist that you're working with. That's so important, you know.
Yeah.
If your artist is singing and they're kind of all hunched, slouched. It's
there
like it's a new word. But yeah, you know, they're all hunched over, and they're feeling a little, you know, choked off, and, you know, then the producer, okay, open up, you know, like move your head this way, try this mouth technique thing. You know, the artist can see their producer if they're excited or if they're, you know, confused at what's being performed.
Right. Exactly.
So vital.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a vital aspect for sure. Awesome. Well, I like to wrap up with the same kind of few set of questions. The first one is, who is your most influential teacher? And it can be a few if you want.
A few. Okay. Well, all of the actual instructors that I've had, you know, Doreen Stapleton was my organ instructor when I was a kid. All of the music instructors I've had, Ken Hudson was my band instructor in middle school. Dale Normando. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Ken Hudson and Dale Normando were my instructors in high school. In middle school. Oh dear. I'll have to look that up. I can see his face. And I have home videos. Good. My dad took home videos of all these people, you know, in our concerts. But, and then, you know, of course, in university, Brian Thurgood, Sandro Dominelli, were both of my private drum set instructors. They were hugely influential. You know, I didn't take drum lessons until university.
Wow.
So, yeah, very, you know, very much a part of who I am and how I play now. But, you know, and then in terms of like, just generally, you know, people that I've followed as idols online, you know, like Simon Phillips, Jeff Porcaro, Keith Carlock, you know, like, yikes, Shannon Forrest.
The list goes on.
Yeah. Like all the big studio cats, the ones that when you hear a track and you hear the drums, you know exactly who it is.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Nice. So the next question is kind of for engineers in a sense. It's, you know, what is your favorite reference track if you're going to a new studio? But for someone like you, like, what would you put on to be inspired? Let's say.
Yeah, I mean, even the engineering thing. I engineered a session at a studio in town that I'm co-producing with a guitar player. So I'm producing his guitar record. And my go-to reference track is I Will Remember by Toto.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's from their album Tamboo in the 90s. And the drum sounds on that record are fucked. Like Simon Phillips, and I Will Remember is just this beautiful tom groove, and Simon's got like 4 rack toms and 2 floor toms, a gong drum, octobans, and you can hear it just like, you know. So that's my go-to. And then anything Steely Dan.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Pick a Steely Dan tune.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nice. Last question is, what would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming session musician?
I don't know. I'd probably actually pick their brains about social media and how to, you know, gain more exposure to. I'm very much not a social media person, but the up and coming ones seem to be.
Right.
I don't know. You know, up and coming like remote players or players in general. I don't know. So if you're recording like at home, learning how to self-mix and balance yourself in a small room is tricky. I think a lot of people just play the same way in their home studio that they would at a bigger studio. But you can't.
Right. Yeah.
You just can't. The room doesn't allow it.
No, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting concept of playing for the room for sure, because especially with drums, like, so many people make that mistake and it just doesn't sound as good, if you're going full on in a tiny room, it's
No.
crazy.
Yeah. So I guess the overarching advice would be discipline, general,
Right.
discipline,
Right.
playing, discipline, setting things up,
Right.
having a routine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
So yeah, a shameless plug for Sessionwire. All you Pro Audio Profiles listeners and watchers, you can click the link in the description for the podcast and YouTube, and go check out Sessionwire. We're offering a special discount to Pro Audio Profiles viewers and listeners. Would love to see you on the platform. Yeah. If you have questions too, you can reach out to us, info@sessionwire.com anytime.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brendan. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for joining in today on Pro Audio Profiles. Make sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next week.